What coaching calls a block, Simone Weil would call a moral claim. Modern coaching culture relies on a familiar diagnosis. If you are not succeeding, not manifesting, not expanding, then something must be in the way. A block. Blocks are framed as internal beliefs, outdated patterns, or external structures that no longer fit who you are becoming. They sound psychological and neutral, but they carry a powerful moral implication. Once something is named a block, it is no longer something you owe care to. It becomes something you are justified in removing. This is where the ethical problem begins. The block as a moral category, not a psychological one. In coaching, a block is never just descriptive. It is evaluative. A block is not simply a difficulty or a tension. It is something standing between you and a desired outcome. It is implicitly negative. It exists to be cleared. And crucially, once a relationship, responsibility, or obligation is framed as a block, its moral status changes. It is no longer something to be worked with. It is something to be worked through, or worked around, or left behind. This is not accidental. The concept of the block performs an important function. It converts ethical friction into a technical problem. Instead of asking, "What do I owe here?" the question becomes, "What is stopping me?" That shift is subtle, but decisive. Simone Weil and the problem of abstraction. This is where Simone Weil becomes an unusually sharp counterpoint to modern coaching logic. Weil argued that moral life does not begin with the self and its projects. It begins with the presence of another person and their vulnerability. From that fact alone, obligations arise. Not because we consented to them, not because they serve our growth, but because harm is possible. For Weil, obligation is not a psychological state. It is not dependent on desire or satisfaction. It exists even when it is inconvenient, even when it slows us down, even when it conflicts with what we want to become. This is precisely why she was suspicious of abstract systems that promise liberation while detaching action from consequence. And that is exactly what the language of blocks does. When obligation is reframed as resistance. In coaching culture, obligation rarely disappears outright. Something more subtle happens. Obligation is reclassified. Loyalty becomes attachment. Responsibility becomes people-pleasing. Restraint becomes fear. Staying becomes stagnation. Obligation is not denied in coaching culture. It is reclassified. What once appeared as an ethical claim made by another person now appears as internal resistance to growth. This reframing is powerful because it does not deny morality. It relocates it. The moral center of gravity moves away from the shared world of consequences and toward the individual's internal experience. If something feels heavy, misaligned, or limiting, that feeling is treated as evidence. Under this logic, obligation is no longer something to be honored. It is something to be interrogated for its obstructive qualities. Weil would recognize this immediately. She warned that when moral reasoning becomes abstracted from concrete human impact, it does not become more enlightened. It becomes more dangerous. The block versus attention. Simone Weil grounded ethics in attention, the capacity to remain present to another person's reality without rushing to reinterpret it. A central concept in Weil's thinking is attention, not mindfulness, not insight. Attention in the sense of staying present to another person's reality without rushing to reinterpret it. Attention is slow. It resists premature explanation. It tolerates discomfort. The concept of the block does the opposite. It accelerates interpretation. It encourages diagnosis over presence. It asks how to move past, not how to remain with. Instead of attending to the fact that another person may be destabilized, dependent, or harmed by a change, the coaching frame asks whether that person represents a limiting factor in your trajectory. Once that question is asked, the ethical work has already been short-circuited. Why blocks feel so convincing in coaching culture? The language of blocks is compelling because it aligns perfectly with achievement culture. High performers are trained to remove obstacles, to optimize systems, to eliminate inefficiencies. Coaching borrows this logic and applies it to human relationships. But relationships are not systems, and people are not friction. What feels like a block may in fact be the place where obligation is most alive. It may be where another person's vulnerability makes a moral claim on us. It may be where restraint, patience, or care is required rather than acceleration. Weil would say that this is not a failure of growth. It is the cost of ethical life. A diagnostic question coaching rarely asks. Here is a question that rarely appears in coaching conversations. If this thing were not blocking my success, would I still feel justified in removing it? That question matters because it reveals whether the decision is grounded in obligation or in outcome optimization. When success becomes the moral reference point, anything that does not contribute to it becomes suspect. Obligation does not vanish. It is simply outweighed. This is why coaching culture struggles to account for harm that occurs on the way to transformation. The framework is not designed to slow a person down when others are affected. It is designed to keep them moving. Weil would call this a failure of moral attention. What coaching calls a block, Weil would call a claim. From a Weilian perspective, what coaching labels a block is often something else entirely. It is a claim made by reality. A claim made by another person. A claim made by vulnerability. Not a claim that you must stay forever. Not a claim that you must sacrifice yourself. But a claim that how you act here matters. That claim does not disappear because you want something different. It does not dissolve because growth feels urgent. And it does not become illegitimate because it slows you down. Obligation is not opposed to change. It governs it. The ethical cost of clearing the path too quickly in coaching. None of this is an argument against change, ambition, or personal development. It is an argument against moral shortcuts. When obligation is reframed as a block, the ethical burden of change is quietly displaced. Harm becomes collateral. Responsibility becomes abstract. And the language of growth provides cover. Simone Weil warned that moral systems fail not when they reject ethics, but when they replace them with abstractions that sound elevated while shedding responsibility. Coaching culture has not eliminated obligation. It has learned how to talk its way around it. By treating obligation as a block to be cleared, it transforms moral claims into obstacles and harm into collateral. What coaching calls a block, Weil would recognize as the very thing demanding our attention.